Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast by JPPI. Monday was a day that won't be forgotten anytime soon. It pulled back, I think, the curtain on the staggering dysfunction that I feel, at least, has taken root at the highest levels of the Israeli government. What unfolded that day was not just one story, but several, and I kind of think that even a veteran Hollywood screenwriter would find everything that happened on that one single day in Israel a bit unrealistic. It started in the morning when the Prime Minister's office announced the appointment of a new head of the Shin Bet, a retired admiral, only for a few hours to pass, and it became clear that Eli Sharvit was not going to become the head of the Shin Bet. It continued with Netanyahu taking the stand in his ongoing corruption trial in Tel Aviv, only to be cut short to head to Jerusalem, where he was questioned in the ongoing investigation known as QatarGate. And this is all happening while Israel continues to face challenges and threats along its borders, and 24 living hostages continue to languish in Hamas captivity. So I was thinking about this crazy day, and I thought that if there's somebody who could maybe do, as we say in Hebrew, make a little seder or make a little order in all of this, it's my guest, Einat Wilf. Einat is a former member of Knesset, is one of the more prolific writers and eloquent thinkers when it comes to Zionism, the state of Israel, and the connection between Israel and the Jewish world. An updated version of her really groundbreaking book, War of Return, all about UNRWA and the complex and I would say negative role that it plays in the region, and definitely in the Israel-Palestinian conflict, is scheduled to come out soon in Hebrew. So Einat, it's great to have you back on the show, and thank you so much for taking the time. I mean, thinking about that Monday and what we saw happening, what did that do to you?
Well, clearly, you don't need me to notice that there is a sense of a spinning out of control around the prime minister, something that Israel could ill afford. But what I found really disturbing, I've been disturbed for a very long time with Israel's position regarding Qatar. It seems that I've developed a kind of a specialty in looking at organizations that seem lovely on the surface, or as you and the Prime Minister said, complex, whether it's UNRWA or Qatar, and actually say, no, these are not complex, certainly not positive actors. They are nefarious actors, precisely, by the way, because they try to pretend to be good actors. UNRWA pretends to be a humanitarian organization rather than the organization that sustains the forever Palestinian war to bring about the destruction of the Jewish state. And Qatar pretends to be some kind of beneficial mediator when it has been the main sponsor of Islamism, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and has been working, I would say, unfortunately, successfully, 24/7 since October 7th to ensure that the hostages are used precisely as Hamas designed it to be, as the means by which Hamas can end the whole event by saying we paid no price. And I want to just say, because sometimes people raise their eyebrows, to date, from the Hamas perspective, they have not paid a price on October 7th, for October 7th. Whatever destruction and killing there is in Gaza, if Hamas can end the whole process with Gaza's territorial integrity maintained, with people not being displaced, and the billions of dollars flowing back while Hamas maintains official or nominal power behind some fake technocratic government, then they will declare, I would say, legitimately victory. And that's how they've been using the hostages. And Qatar has been aiding them in that. And Israel has completely failed to call out Qatar, just as it did with UNRWA, for its nefarious role.
I mean, you look at what happened on Monday and the appointment of the new Shin Bet chief in place of Ronin Bar, who the government has decided to remove from his position, whether legitimately or not. And without getting into that whole issue, Eli Sharvit, retired Navy admiral, seems like a good guy. I read what Gadi Eisenkot, who can't be confused with the being a Benjamin Netanyahu supporter, said that Shavit has a backbone, integrity, principle, good commander, good manager, etc. So seems okay. Not first time that a Navy admiral is made head of the Shabak. It happened back in the 90s after the Rabin assassination with Amiai alone. But you see how it was announced and retracted so quickly. Now, besides for just feeling bad for Eli Sharvit, who was used clearly as a pawn in something, what does it tell you about what's going on in the Prime Minister's office?
Again, as I said, there's clearly for some time now an element of spinning out of control. Also, you know how airplanes, in order to avoid rocket attacks, I forgot what they call it in English. Flares, exactly. So I think this is what's happening in the Prime Minister's office. They're sending a lot of flares in order to try to deflect whatever attacks are taking place. I genuinely believe that the whole Qatari issue is much, much bigger than it currently discussed. We have information coming through memory, and I will say memory is my intelligence go-to. They've been much better than Israel's intelligence services. They've called out the Qatari issue going at least a decade back. People are now trying to focus on the last year or two. We know that Qatar, as a nefarious actor, kind of insinuates, infiltrates every country in the world. We know that they do it in order to deflect from their nefarious role, from their geography. You only need to open a map and to see that a little Saudi invasion and there's no Qatar. So the fact that they have so much oil and gas and they are so geographically vulnerable has made them one of the world's and the most nefarious actors. Al Jazeera, which should be considered one of the major combatants in the war. My colleague, Dr. Shani Moore, has repeatedly written about the fact that Al Jazeera's anti-Semitism is the reason it's so popular in the West. Otherwise, it wouldn't be quoted so heavily by so-called respectable Western media. So Qatar is very much an enemy country, regardless of the official definition. It has been operating very busily to ensure that Israel cannot achieve its war aims. And if the Prime Minister fails to understand that Qatar is an enemy, just like he failed to understand that UNRWA is an enemy, just like he failed to take action in time against UNRWA, against the Palestinian ideology, just like he failed after October 7th to correctly define the enemy as not just Hamas, but Gaza and Palestinianism more broadly. I will say that what worries me is not that single day on Monday. What worries me is the continued, persistent inability of the Prime Minister to correctly identify our enemies.
And is that because, and I want to dive into Qatar, but before that, is it because this is obviously Monday's a symptom, and you're right. I think definitely agree with you in the description or diagnosis of the fact that this is something that's repeatedly happening. While Netanyahu likes to definitely present himself as the guy who saw things first, definitely when it comes to Iran, here we're consistently seeing the guy who's seeing it last. But
and not even seeing it.
Or not even seeing it, right. But is it also because of political expediency? Is it that this is just all, at the end of the day, how do I hold on to the reins of power and stay in office?
It's all the same. It's also personality. I mean, he's been like that ever since I've known him, long before there was his trial or legal issues. He has always repeatedly failed to see the Palestinians as enemies. He, as always, you know, in Hebrew you say zilzul. There's no good English word that kind of brings together the dismissiveness and contempt. To the present, he refuses to acknowledge that Sinwar played him, precisely because Sinwar knew that Netanyahu does not take the Palestinians seriously as an enemy, that he thought that they were some toddlers in a tantrum that you could buy with some cash, and Sinwar played precisely into that kind of hubris, misconception, dismissiveness, and there is still a complete unwillingness to really appreciate that he's been played by a smart and sophisticated enemy. And to the present, there is still no acknowledgement that Hamas, backed by Qatar, are behaving in a sophisticated manner, using the hostages, not just to exchange them for prisoners, but to maintain themselves in power, in effective power, to not pay an effective price for October 7th. So this is well before he had any legal problem. I would say the greatest fault, and what you alluded to, it is an even greater fault because he is the man who claimed to be paranoid on behalf of us all. I don't know if you've heard his various Holocaust Day speeches over the years.
Oh, yeah. How could you miss them, Einat?
Yes. So, putting Iran aside, if you noticed, he would always talk about the fact that Jews don't have the ability to recognize danger in time. But so in that, he basically promised he basically told us, you go have fun. There's actually actual quotes. You go celebrate, you go have fun, you go enjoy yourselves. I'll be the paranoid in chief. I'll be the person who will be paranoid on behalf of the Jewish people, who will see the danger before everyone. And literally under his nose, he was played by the Palestinians, by Qatar, because long before his legal issues, there is something, I don't know what it is, a hubris, an ego, a refusal to treat the Palestinians seriously, a complete inability to see the real enemy in front of his eyes.
So let's talk about the Qataris for a moment. You said before that it's a place that could easily be overrun by the Saudis and taken over. A small little country, really has no military capabilities. They have the U.S. base there, which kind of does give them the protection. And that's obviously why they pay so much money for it. But they use their money very smartly all over the world, where they're buying up Paris city blocks as well as football clubs and doing the same thing in London, in the UK, and of course, their investment in colleges and university campuses across the United States and around other parts of the world. And also, it has to be said, investing large amounts of money in some of the biggest investment banks and hedge funds, many of them set up just days after former administration officials stepped down, whether Republicans or Democrats. So their tentacles are everywhere. And apparently, according to the allegations, at least also within the closed circle of the Israeli prime minister. And for people who might not know, just one quick word, they are believed to have been paying for at least one advisor who was working at the time for the prime minister, Eli Feldstein, who was serving as some sort of military affairs spokesperson for the prime minister, but also the involvement of somebody who was alleged involvement of someone who's the closest advisor to the prime minister, Yonatan Urich, and different journalists, including Tzvika Klein, who is the current editor of the Jerusalem Post. And I will put out a disclaimer here. I was once the editor of the Jerusalem Post because a very close friend, and I believe 100% in him and his innocence. But I put that aside for a moment. How do you understand what they might have been? If all this is true and they're somehow involved, what were they trying to achieve here with Eli Feldstein, Urich, and whatever else they were trying to do in the prime minister's office?
And again, as I'm saying, there is at least open information that Memory published that the Qatari kind of transfer of funds to kind of around the prime minister is at least a decade old. They're trying to kind of now limit the fallout and say that it's only the last couple of years. It's only two people. There is information that needs to be investigated that goes back at least a decade. The way that Qataris work, which you correctly identify, is they basically work according to the Hebrew saying of shlach lachmecha. You kind of you send out all these investments, not necessarily for an immediate reward, but it's an investment. you assume that at one point it will be valuable, at one point you will need it, and precisely because they are so vulnerable, they do it everywhere, and they can afford to spread it everywhere and in every direction. Like you said, and they will. Their means of bribery are also all kinds. Someone will be in debt. They will give them the money to cover the debts. They will buy major stakes in key holdings in key capitals, key countries. They will buy prestigious organizations from Harvard to Paris Saint-Germain. And as a result, the people who have been bought now have to say nice things about them. They will buy the World Cup. And this is how they constantly whitewash. Again, to quote Dr. Shani Moore, without all this, all these organizations, countries, people will not be caught dead with the slave-holding theocracy, but when it owns, some of the most expensive hotels in London, when it pays your debts, when it funds money for things you need, they're very good at identifying your needs and kind of catering to them. Like you said, they're sophisticated. And it's not about getting an immediate reward. That's how sophisticated bribery works. It's about assuming that at one point, shlach lachmecha, because one day it will be of value.
And it will have paid off. And I mean, there's a whole technical conversation here of how could have someone who's even working for the prime minister at the same time also be getting money from another client. Well, for some reason, our system does allow for freelance contractors to get some access to prime minister, or at least that's what was happening here. So these were people who were had their hands, their fingers in multiple places at the same time. Do you think, based on what you're feeling and knowing Netanyahu, did he have any idea that this might have been going on within his office?
Again, it's important to say, generally they're trying to limit the conversation now to one or two people. We have open information, go to memory, that goes back with Qatar funding at least a decade. Mm-hmm. So that's something that needs to be investigated. It's a bigger issue. But I will say this, Amit Segal himself, the person who is constantly briefed by the prime minister, said several times in the past, the man is a complete, control freak. No word, no nothing under his control goes without him knowing what's going on. And again, I will express my amazement at his ability for so many years, on the one hand, to be a control freak, which everyone knows, and again say, as he did on October 7th, I didn't know, I didn't
They didn't
hear,
wake me up.
I wasn't told.
Right.
Yes.
Can you explain to us? Yes. Can you explain to us, Einat, the connection between Qatar and Egypt here? Because there's reports that one of the issues that maybe these people were allegedly asked to do, or a task, was to not slander necessarily, but cast a negative light on Egypt, because Egypt and the Qataris are at something of locked horns in a regional battle of sorts.
So when Syria collapsed, I wrote that in the Middle East, the enemy of your enemy is not your friend. He's still your enemy. I would say the same about Qatar and Egypt. I don't care that they're locked horns. I don't know about leadership of the Arab or Muslim worlds or whatever. They are both, shall we say, highly, highly problematic actors. My belief is that Israel failed both, and I wrote about it from the beginning after October 7th because it was very suspicious, that Israel not only called out Qatar for its nefarious role, it didn't remind people that Gaza had a border with Egypt, right? It was months before Israel went into the border with Egypt, the Philadelphia corridor, and yet Israel didn't do the most fundamental basic thing of reminding the world that Gaza has a border with Egypt. Everyone is welcome to leave through Egypt. Israel is under zero obligation to supply its enemy. And again, because we failed to correctly define the enemy, just Hamas, it's all of Gaza. Israel has no obligation to supply its enemy at a time of war. It is a bizarre idea that has never been done in any war. Egypt is more than welcome to supply the Gazans. It clearly supplied them above and below ground before October 7th. It's welcome to do so, but Israel is under no obligation. For months, we allowed, I called it the disappearing border with Egypt. We allowed people to believe that only Israel has any responsibility to Gaza. So I would argue that Israel failed both in treating Qatar and Egypt as, shall we say, the highly, highly problematic actors that they are. I will say, at the minimum, both Qatar and Egypt very much share the desire to ensure that Israel does not have a clear victory in this war.
I mean, on the topic of Egypt, we at JPPI at the Glazer Data Center did a study using AI and looked at about 4,000 op-eds that had been published over the last 15 months by two of the leading newspapers, Al-Ahram and Al-Jumeirah. Al-Ahram is probably the most well-known Egyptian newspaper. Al-Jumeirah is a newspaper that actually Anwar Sadat was once upon a time the editor-in-chief of it. And out of these 3,000, 80 out of the 4,000 op-eds, pardon me, about 1,200 or so talk about Israel, which is a big number, about 30%. And out of those 30%, 87% have a negative sentiment. There's also a bunch that are blatantly anti-Semitic. We see the buildup of forces today in Egypt. What do you make of what they're doing? What is Egypt's game here?
First of all, to the extent that Egypt and Qatar are locking horns about anything, it's indeed who's the greater leader in producing and promoting anti-Semitic content in Arabic and in English to the world. I mean, you're absolutely right. This is not new. Egypt, under the guise of supposedly a peace agreement, has been a top producer and promoter of the most vile anti-Semitic content in the Arabic language to the Arabic-speaking world. Under the guise of the peace agreement, they have essentially undermined many of the achievements that I would say that Israel had in the 1974-75 separation of forces agreement. And now we don't have the Sinai. So I think one of the key things, and we know that Egypt played a double game in Gaza. Essentially, the way that Syria played in Lebanon, officially the border with Egypt is at peace, as was, by the way, the border with Syria. But both Syria and Egypt use Lebanon and Gaza, each respectively, as a way to basically bleed Israel on a regular basis, because, you know, even though Syria is officially at war and Egypt is officially at peace, they both share the same goal of basically making sure that Israel is weak. And I think, again, Israel needs to be with very open eyes. And my argument is that Israel needs to go back to Egypt and say, look, those are the elements of our agreement, and we're going to start holding you to it. Instead, Israel has played a game of constantly trying to appease the Egyptians, like we did with the Palestinians and Hamas and, I don't know, the Qataris. The whole change of the policy of appeasement has to change all over, not just with the Palestinians.
But I mean, there's also something that deeply troubles me, at least. And I hear you on the Israeli role here, but last week was 46 years to the signing of the Camp David Accords. And it's as if it didn't happen. Someone described the peace treaty with them to like a glorified ceasefire, which is what it is. I mean, there wasn't even a phone call between Israel's prime minister and the president of Egypt. And I kind of blame the two of them, because this tension that now exists between our two countries, I mean, none of us have anything to gain from this situation. And if they were responsible leaders, they would pick up the freaking phone, they would get on the horn with one another, and they'd solve this out. But instead, and again, is this politics? I mean, I understand Egypt. It's got to, play to its street. Gaza's going on. Israel's the bad guy, etc. But like, what is why are both of us, so he's playing politics, Sisi, but why is Bibi letting this go on?
Oh no, this is much bigger than playing politics. It's been happening again for decades now. Officially, Egypt has a peace agreement, but on literally every element of the peace agreement, it pretty much did the opposite. Peace, we talk about peace as being this thing of like, we imagine peace as one thing, but people said it's a glorified ceasefire. I would say barely even that. And we're treating it with these, gloves as if it's, and rather than call it out for what it is. You asked about what Netanyahu's game. Again, as I said, look at it. Contrary to the baritone, tough-talking rhetoric, he's an appeaser.
Yeah.
Look at everything. It is constantly the policy of...
Which is completely against the image he tries to project and portray.
I know, and that is why it's so dangerous, because the rhetoric is somehow compelling. The baritone voice is compelling. You actually think this is a tough-talking person.
So he wants you to think he's Churchill, but he's really Chamberlain.
And Chamberlain at least had really, really good intentions and didn't pretend to be something that he was not.
Okay, Einat, I'm going to let you go, but I have one last topic I do want to touch base with and get your thoughts on. The Prime Minister and his wife are in Hungary, in Budapest, as we're recording this. They took off late Wednesday night, and they're there for some meetings with Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister, all good. But today, the Hungarians who were signatories to the Rome Statute and the ICC announced that they're pulling out. The fact that Netanyahu even went there now with an arrest warrant kind of hovering above his head was itself news, but the fact that the Hungary, the first EU country to pull out, that's big news. I mean, would you anticipate that this is something that might have a ripple effect?
In general, we're witnessing the utter collapse of the post-World War II institutions. And by the way, because they have been hijacked and corrupted by the insertion of what I've come to call Palestinianism, essentially anti-Zionism, a respectable form of anti-Semitism, and generally, whatever Palestinianism hijacks ultimately is left to be an empty shell of its former self and collapses. And it's a shame, because there were beautiful and noble intentions behind all these institutions, but they fell to the one virus that is known to corrupt and drive societies mad, the obsession with the collective Jew. And yes, it has led them to be empty shells and shadows of their noble foundational ideals.
Yeah, and it's something that, like the ICC that was supposed to prevent a real genocide from happening has been hijacked
the
to
UN,
be used.
The ICC, UNRWA, the ICJ. We are literally witnessing its collapse. It's been building for years, if not decades, and the collapse is only because they allowed themselves to be obsessed with Palestinianism, with the undoing of the collective Jew and its sovereignty. And that's what it looks like when you spend your life with this obsession.
Einat Wilf, thank you so much for joining us. And to all our listeners and viewers, thank you for being with us. Have a great weekend. A Shabbat Shalom. You can find us as always where podcasts can be found, YouTube, and of course the website of Times of Israel. And we will be back next week we'll be taking off a week over the holiday of Pesach, of Passover, but we'll still be here next week with another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast.